Hello, and welcome to the Geopolitics Explained podcast. This is the podcast that delves into the intricate world of global politics of the past and present, while also exploring potential possibilities for what tomorrow could bring. I'm your host, Dylan, and in each episode here of the Geopolitics Explained podcast, we'll break down complex issues into small, understandable chunks through in-depth scenario analysis. So, come and join us as we navigate the ever-changing landscape of international relations, uncovering the stories behind the headlines and predicting trends that could shape the future of our world. This has been recorded on the 23rd of May, 2025. As you can see from the title, today's episode is going to delve into some updates that we've seen occurring surrounding the war between Russia and Ukraine. Specifically, I'm going to dive into the U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal, which seems to have been on the table for many months. That's because it has been. It started back in February in a meeting in the Oval Office between Trump and Zelensky and others from Trump's administration that ended in the shouting match that we thought at the time was going to completely derail diplomacy between the United States and Ukraine. As we know with hindsight, based on this deal being signed, this didn't happen, but things did look tense for a while. So today I'm going to explore the history that got us to this deal being signed, what is included in this deal, and where this deal could take us. I will also explore the recent talks between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul that were the first direct talks between the two countries since 2022. What was spoke about during this talk, and will we see any future talks? If we do see future talks, will they lead to actual progress, or are these talks just for show? Let's dive in. Before Trump re-entered office, the Ukrainian hope was for a United States security guarantee. When Trump entered, he made it clear that this wouldn't be an offer on the table. After the Oval Office shouting match, it seemed that there would be a complete decoupling of relations between the United States and Ukraine, and that Ukraine would be left with only the support of the Europeans. This contributed to Europe's massive rise in rhetoric about needing to be responsible for its own security and its own defence. In the weeks and months that followed, we saw Trump pivot more towards Russia and Putin. He called Zelensky a dictator, and he called for $500 billion worth of Ukrainian rare earths to be sent to the United States as part of a minerals deal to repay all the aid that the United States has sent Ukraine. However, things have changed in the last few weeks. Trump seemingly realised that Putin isn't serious about peace, since the Russians do have a small amount of momentum on the ground. Putin was seeing what he could get out of Trump. Since Trump loves to negotiate a deal, it was worth sitting down with Trump and seeing what he would offer. And in this sense, Trump did actually bite. He offered reduced sanctions and also the potential for a Russia-US minerals deal. This changed when Trump and Zelensky met at the Vatican for the funeral of Pope Francis. In the days that followed, Trump is quoted as saying that Putin could be tapping him along a bit. It was here where Trump likely realised that the Russians weren't incentivized to pursue a deal. Language since then has changed, with Trump referring to the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a full-scale invasion, and also referring to Russia as the Russian war machine. So, with these changes emerging in relations between Ukraine and the United States, in the aftermath of this, on April 30th, we saw the minerals deal signed between the two countries. Since then, this has also been ratified in the Ukrainian parliament. So, what is involved in this minerals deal? Firstly, the main aim of this is that there is now an economic incentive for the United States to invest in Ukraine's defence and reconstruction. This will come via an investment fund for Ukrainian recovery. Included in the deal are 55 minerals, which include oil, gas, graphite, titanium, and lithium. From the United States' point of view, this will help to reduce their reliance on China, especially in the rare earths sphere. We have recently, as part of the trade war, seen China enact export controls on scandium and yttrium. So this has led the Trump administration to seek alternative sources of rare earths. This also heavily contributes towards Trump's calls for a potential deal or annexation of Greenland. Russia uses the fact that NATO has advanced towards its borders as a reason why a security deal for Ukraine, in their opinion, would not be allowed to happen, because this would put Western troops in Ukraine, which would be even closer to Russia's borders. This is a message to Moscow that there are alternative ways that a deal can be orchestrated, and this deal that is a resources for security deal has been the way that the Trump administration has headed. This also benefits Ukraine in the resources sphere. They often don't have the capabilities to develop and then make money from their own projects. With US involvement, this will help facilitate that and get projects to a state of operation. Interestingly, there are some addendums here that Trump initially wanted including in the deal that haven't been included. As I mentioned earlier, Trump wanted all of the aid given back that the United States had given Ukraine during the course of this war. Zelensky has eked out some concessions from Trump because this hasn't been included. Also, the minerals deal doesn't include any current projects that exist within Ukraine. So if the United States is to make profit from such a deal, it will have to come from developing and starting new projects. Finally, this investment fund is aiming to incite investment by having no taxes on contributions or revenues. Now, unfortunately, this deal has highlighted the current geographic issues that we see within Ukraine. The east of Ukraine is typically more economically developed. As we know, this is the territory that Russia has currently annexed. And as a result of this, it has taken amounts of Ukraine's wealth. This deal could be aiming to ensure that Ukraine doesn't lose any more of its wealth. This could also help integrate Western Ukraine into European supply chains and towards EU membership. Now, this deal isn't all positive. There are some negatives. Firstly, and the biggest point, is that the US could walk away from this deal at any point and they would lose very little. This is an economic partnership. There is no security guarantee for Ukraine. And so, with the United States being able to walk away so easily, if the Russians did suddenly experience a massive breakthrough and they headed further west into Ukraine, the United States could just walk away. Ukraine will have full ownership of the resources that are produced from these new projects, but the US and Ukraine will share decision-making and royalties equally. Also, all revenue from the first decade will be reinvested in Ukraine, but this likely won't become an advantage that we will actually see because most projects take 10 to 20 years to become operational. The biggest positive here is that some progress has been made. This is beyond anything that Biden did. And so, in my opinion, although there are negative aspects to consider, the positives here outweigh the negatives, especially if we do see some of these projects become developed and operational. So, now that this deal has been signed, where will we see it head in the future? The first step here will be geological mapping in Ukraine to search for potential resources. This was last done by the Soviets between 30 and 60 years ago using outdated techniques. So it's not actually known to a large degree of accuracy what resources Ukraine possesses. It is just estimated to be around 5% of global reserves. We will also see investment in infrastructure, but only if this is militarily secure. If Russia can just attack areas where investment is being implemented, then this will be a waste of investment. Even though the United States could pull out at any time, I believe if it is militarily secure, they are incentivized to stay, because this is one way in which they can attempt to reduce their reliance on Chinese rare earths. We've also seen Trump pursuing other minerals deals, of course, the main one being Greenland. But Trump has also proposed a security for minerals deal in the Democratic Republic of the Congo to counter M23 rebels who are backed by Rwanda and who launched raids into eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. So Trump here is seeking more minerals to reduce reliance on China, and Ukraine is a large part of this pursuit. Now, of course, one of the biggest questions with this deal is how will it affect the actual war on the ground between Russia and Ukraine? This is where the talks that we saw between Ukraine and Russia in Istanbul enter the picture. Now, since Trump re-entered office, especially in the last month, we have seen brief ceasefires occur between Russia and Ukraine. Firstly, there was a ceasefire on attacks of energy infrastructure. This ceasefire has been and gone. And we also saw a 3-day ceasefire implemented around the time when Russia was celebrating VE Day. However, none of these ceasefires have stuck. So, did we make some progress in Istanbul in the first direct talks between Russia and Ukraine since 2022? Now, to start with a positive, we did see another 1,000 prisoner swap negotiated between Russia and Ukraine. But this is one of the only positives that we saw. First of all, there was no Putin there was no Zelensky, and there was no Trump. Despite previous reports that Zelensky and Trump were considering going to Istanbul. It should be noted that Ukraine did request direct talks with Putin, which the Russian delegation stated was noted. In the aftermath of the talks in Istanbul, Zelensky and many European leaders had a phone call with Donald Trump. It was in this phone call that Macron stated that Putin was buying time. In my opinion, this is what is still occurring. Another negative aspect of these talks in Istanbul was the level of delegation that was sent. Ukraine sent one of their head negotiators and one of Zelensky's closest aides. They sent the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Deputy Head of the Intelligence Service, the Defence Minister, and the Deputy Head of the Armed Forces General Staff. Whereas the Russians sent the Deputy Defence Minister, the Deputy Foreign Minister, a Putin aide, and a Military Intelligence Agency Director. Finally, one of the biggest talking points from the talks was that there were a number of Russian demands that were deemed unacceptable. Russia doesn't want to budge from the policies that they wished to be implemented in the event of a ceasefire, which they detailed in the 2022 Istanbul communique. This would involve no war damage compensation, international recognition of the Russian annexation of Crimea, no security agreement for Ukraine, a reduced military for Ukraine, abandoned NATO ambitions for Ukraine, neutrality, which would involve no foreign troops being positioned in Ukraine, and the ceding of the annexed states. This would put Ukraine completely at the whims of Russia, who could restart the war at any moment, with Ukraine in a weakened position, and it likely wouldn't be able to defend itself as well as it has done in the war that started in February 2022. So this boils down to Russia holding too high demands for a ceasefire to ever progress further than initial talks. This is because Russia does have a small amount of momentum, albeit it will take them 80 plus years to take the entirety of Ukraine at this pace. But the Russians aren't incentivized to pursue a ceasefire currently. This is where Trump could come into play if he can come up with a potential way for the Russians to be incentivized to come to the table. But as of now, with some of these Russian points being seen as non-starters, I don't believe ceasefire talks will progress any further. This has been another episode of the Geopolitics Explained podcast. I want to thank you all for listening. I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode, why not leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice? And if you want more content like this, we write over on Substack. You can find the link for this in the description. I've also recently started recording podcast episodes based on the blog posts over on Substack. So if you don't want to read these posts, you can also listen to them here on the Geopolitics Explained podcast. I've been Dylan. I'll talk to you next time.